Hello, fellow Avery supporters. I've done something I didn't think was going to happen. I thought there was a good chance that we'd eventually hit an evidence ceiling and there'd be nothing more to discover about this case, much less debate and discuss. As it turns out, there's enough evidence out there that has come to light that I'm doing another video. This video is twofold. The first part, well, kind of the first part, how did it all start? Which correlates to another question that's been asked over and over, and that's why did the cops hate Steven Avery so much? What did he do to earn their wrath? And the other question, which has slowly begun gaining momentum, it seems, on the internet and other places, is Teresa Halbach really dead? Is there a reason that she doesn't show up on the Social Security Death Index? We will get to those questions in this extensive and admittedly repeating video, but I unfortunately feel that I have to reiterate points multiple times because the single Passover doesn't seem to cut it. I want to start off by saying on part 9 that Andres Martinez was just an added wrinkle, like this possibility is an if, a big if. If he was part of this whole plot somehow, I mean, wouldn't that be grand to have him arrested and then deported to a country with no extradition treaty? That's all I was saying. More like a fiction novel or a James Bond, film than real life. But I was simply saying that if he was involved and got deported, then wow, what a whopper of a development that would turn out to be. But as it turns out, none of that was ever the case, but I did add it just in case it did turn out. I made the video before I had concrete proof that he was still in jail, but I didn't want to wait for that one thing just to publish the video not to publish the video on that one holdup. I just wanted to mention that because a lot of people apparently got hung up on that and they weren't aware that it was an if scenario. I mean, all these theories that I point out are technically if scenarios. So we have to take everything with a grain of salt. Also, I want to say that there are a lot of people involved in the gathering of this information here for part 10 and even for previous videos. I choose not to say who they are simply because I don't know if anybody wants to be associated with this in that fashion, but I do want to acknowledge them since a lot of this information was gathered elsewhere. I'm just putting the pieces together as I logically see that they fit. Yes, there's guesswork in this, but when you don't know who's being honest in your investigation, cops, all you can really do is guess. So for those of you who helped in this, I unidentifiably thank you. This video too is kind of off the cuff, as you may have guessed, so here goes. But before I begin, I want to say, is it still possible that Steven did this? Sure. Highly doubtful, but sure. Is it possible that Scott Taddick did this? Is it possible that the ex, Ryan Hilligus, did this? Is it possible that that dude from Arizona did this? Sure. All of this is possible. It's possible that this unbelievably timed gift from the heavens in the form of Teresa Halbach going missing just showed up at the exact time that the depositions were happening and that Teresa was declared dead on her death certificate on November 10th, the exact day that Sheriff Kasurk was supposed to be deposed. Sure, they could have just stumbled upon a dead body and used it to frame Steven Avery because, hey, he was about to bring down holy hell, strip their lives apart, make them lose their house and their way of life, bash their egos, and with them being guilty in civil court, even though Attorney General at the time, Peg Lautenschlager, in their report said, nothing to say here, people, like Officer Barbrady, this would have laid the groundwork for these cops and judges to land in federal ass-bang prison. This would have destroyed those involved and made the rest of the county workers, judges, DPW workers, cops, everybody having to pay the remainder of the suit to pay it off. Remember, according to the Manitowoc County Board meeting minutes in 2003, the biennial state budget had just been passed, so there was no way in deficit-ridden Wisconsin that they were going to get a bailout from the state. And Manitowoc was in such dire circumstances economically that state legislators attended the meeting and remarked on the dire economic circumstances of Manitowoc County. It's on page 1 of the meeting minutes if you care to check it out. They were in real monetary trouble. Then add things like the bid scandal with the now owners of the surrounding donut of properties that encircled the Avery Auto Salvage property, the Maples, who own Badgerland Aggregates. You could only come to the conclusion that you have the seeds of corruption afoot. Then you add the kicker, the key kicker, that no one mentions. Now, for those of you who watch Breaking Bad, and yes, I'm aware it's a fiction, but the whole art mimics life, life mimics art is a cliche for a reason. For those of you who know the character Mike Ehrmantraut from both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, he was a Philly cop. And even though he's a business is business type of guy and an honest crooked cop, so to speak, he was on the take. His son followed in his footsteps and became a cop. He tried to do the right thing and called out some cops on the take and ended up getting killed because of it. As he's telling his son's widow about this, he says a very profound thing. YouTube it if you want to. And I'm sure my impersonation will sound really good with his voice modulation. But he says, you know what a cop fears most? More than being shot, more than anything? Prison. Being locked up with everybody you put away. You threaten a cop with that, you make him dangerous. That is the main reason the cops needed to do what they did. Sure, the money and their egos and having their families out on the street, that would have been a bad thing, but landing in prison for being that corrupt that went back as far as it did, that is a major motivator. In fact, it is the greatest motivator that I can possibly think of. So sure, all of this could have been a luckily timed coincidence that favored the ultra-crooked mafioso sheriff's department. But to quote Obi-Wan Kenobi, in my experience, there's no such thing as luck. Granted, there's no such thing as Jedi either, but if you analyze the chances of that happening with this crowd, with their expertise and training, and with a year to plan their way out of federal-ass bank prison, I have a hard time believing that this happenstance was really just that, happenstance. So what do I mean when I say that far back? Well, let's start at the beginning. People continuously ask, what the hell did Steven Avery do to make himself a target? What was it that made the cops choose him? Why did they hate him so much? There has to be some logical explanation why he was the subject for their wrath and why he was again sitting in jail for the rest of his life on a garbage charge with garbage evidence. Why? No one that I've ever heard of or read has answered this question to my satisfaction. So I thought to myself, well, what could it possibly be? We've all been through high school. We all know how rumors go. Virgins are somehow sluts, shy dudes are really closet homosexuals, etc. Remember when I said that if I walked into a town hall meeting and pointed at a city council member or whoever, and I stated, this person is a child molester, especially if I'm a trusted member of the community, and nobody in the room really knew the accused, the crowd would sit and wonder why I said that. Why would I, a trusted member of the community, say that about someone else if it weren't true? Even if it turns out that I was completely lying, Kratz in his press conference, the accusation would forever stick in the minds of the people that were there to witness it. They'd go home and they'd tell their friends and neighbors and relatives, and every time they'd see that person, they'd think in the back of their minds that he may very well have been a child molester, even though it was a blatant lie. Remember, people were on Avery's side until Brendan's confession. Now, they're still thinking that the story that Brendan gave is the truth. I'll give you an example. In high school, I was told that this guy, whom to this day I've never met, supposedly had sex with his dog. This was the rumor. Ironically, the guy who told me ended up coming out of the closet years later, and the people in high school rumored that he was really gay, which ended up being the case. Point is, the gay guy told a story about someone else when he himself had rumors circulating about him that ended up being true. Oh, the irony. I guess that maybe gives credit to what he would say in that sort of possibility. But anyway, to this day, if I happen to see this dog dude, as I'll call him, I would still have it in the back of my mind that even though it's probably preposterously improbable, that just like the accused city council member, that this guy might have actually had sex with his dog. Now, I don't even know if he had a dog. If he did, what gender the dog was or what type of dog. I mean, was it a Chihuahua or a Great Dane? I mean, kind of makes a difference if you know what I mean. But if that were to really happen, how would somebody even know about that? I mean, it's not like, it's something you have a conversation with your high school friends about, right? And it's not something you'd try if somebody was home or possibly coming home at that moment, so nobody would be there to witness it, right? Kind of like One-Eyed Willie from the Goonies. Wait a minute, Mikey. If he killed all his men, how did the map or the story get out? I mean, even so, depending on the dog, there would probably be some sort of forensic evidence to such a crime. There'd probably be some physical damage to which a vet would tell the parents that something went on, and the vet would be obliged to tell the cops, and there would be a legal case, and it'd probably make the news, and you'd have the embarrassment, cause the family to leave town. Of course, this was before the age of the internet, but still, news was news. I say that because if this really were to have happened, there probably would have been irrefutable proof that this guy really had sex with his dog. Yet, if it were true, this one guy would be privy to such information? 99.9% chance, just like that city council member, that the rumor was just that, some crazy rumor started by the gay dude. Who knows? Maybe the dog dude was really a flame that the gay dude had, but he thought he might blab about it, so he made up some crazy story so he'd keep quiet about it. Yet, if I saw dog dude today, decades later, guess what would be in the back of my mind? Hell, I'm telling you guys about it right now. That's how much this story stuck out, ridiculous as it may be. Do you think I'm going to ask him if it's true if I ever saw this guy? Hell no. I mean, how weird would I look? Hey dude, aren't you the guy who had sex with his dog? Yet, it's in the back of my mind. And there's a good chance this guy has no idea that somebody said that about him. In a similar vein, and this kind of further proves my point, this other guy in high school that I still know, separate guy, different story, we're acquaintances. And this guy had an ex-girlfriend who mentioned to me one time when we were still in high school that this guy had an 11-inch genitalia rod, for lack of a better term, and could engage in self-preservation of a gymnastic kind, shall we say. Kind of like the conversation in the movie Clerks and how Randall's cousin died via the broken neck. I walked into a bar one time, and this is many years ago. I was half blitzed. This is about 5 years out of high school, and he was there. We recognized each other from school, and we were the only ones in the bar, minus this one random dude. I mean, it was like 6 p.m. No one else was there. I said, "Hey, you're so-and-so from class of blah, blah, blah." And he concurred. And then, being half schnockered, I asked for verification of the rumor I'd heard about them. I said, "Hey, aren't you the guy who can blank his own blank?" I mean, due to the rumor, I was expecting an answer of yes, which I would have told him he needed to move to LA and make a certain genre of films, but the look on his face seemed to say that I was incorrect. But the random dude at the bar said, "Wow," almost in disbelief that I'd asked that. Granted, if it were true, I mean, what guy would admit to that? And hell, even if it weren't true, that's a rumor that any guy would like to have spread about them. He never did answer the question, and again, I was half buzzed, but the point is I actually asked him that question. But yet, do you think I'd have the gall, even half blitz, to ask Dog Dude if he had sex with his dog? Hell no. So when we start talking about where this Avery case really started, it all goes back to one incident: the rumor. A rumor can be a very powerful thing. Look at how Ken Kratz's press conference tainted the jury pool. What rumor am I talking about? The rumor that Steven Avery was flashing and spanking at bare ass on the hood of his car in the middle of winter as his own cousin drove down the road. Even though it was Gregory Allen that was known for such behavior, so somebody was doing something, so that's even worse and harder to disprove that lie if somebody is doing something, but the finger is pointed at Avery. The point is, all of this started because of that rumor. Sure, Avery had the burglaries and the cat incident, but nothing that was violence towards people or women, and certainly nothing of a sexual nature. Why is this important? Because if you had a set of events in motion to frame somebody for a violent sexual assault on somebody, it's far more believable if you have proof of prior behavior on prior events, especially from the all-trusting police department and from somebody who is a relative of the accused. In fact, I can't think of a worse scenario to have a rumor started. Your own relative, who's related to a cop, a trusted member of society, says you're committing this vile act. I mean, that's a double whammy. It's even worse when you're in a family sect who are outcasts and would react in a predictable way. I know there are going to be people who are making comments and say, "Oh, no, things aren't like that." Bull. They are. People always say that they'd react a certain way when human nature and history always tells a different story. I know there are going to be people out there who would say, "Well, Steven Avery didn't need to do things like that," or "I've had people spread rumors about me and I just ignore them. Those people are meaningless, they're insignificant in my life, and they don't have any bearing on..." Well, you know what? Maybe that's true. But again, this is somebody who's a family member and in law enforcement saying it about the Averys. Now, maybe there's something in your life to where you really don't care. Say people who have money or who are high supposedly on the socioeconomic ladder, that it takes a lot more hatchet swings to knock that tree down, or if you own your own business, or if you're a civil servant. Civil servants, the only way you get fired is if you sleep with a minor or kill somebody. So there are times, yes, to where, hey, say what you want, or say the person starting the rumors is the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder. Nobody cares what they think. But again, look at the situation, because when you're in Steven Avery's case, that's all you have is your reputation. Now, there are plenty of instances where basically, you know what, I'm a lot of things, but I'm not that. I mean, you have the movie The Usual Suspects. Verbal Kint says, "I'm not a rat, Agent Coolion." You got the movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, where Benicio del Toro's character basically, points to the back room for the waitress, the cute little waitress. She's like, "Hey, you want to go back, get it on?" And she basically says, "You know what? I work in this 2-bit diner, but the one thing I'm not is I'm not a whore." Okay, but this was law enforcement and a family member saying this about Steven Avery. Steven Avery admitted to his burglaries. He admitted to everything he'd done. So when this rumor comes around, I don't care who you are. This is something that's kind of important because, again, this is going to be something that would stick with him for the rest of his life, especially in a small town where everybody knows your name. So it's pretty significant when Steven Avery's cousin Sandra starts this rumor. As it turns out, and this is just one of the pieces of information that I became privy to, but apparently Steven's cousin Sandra, the one who started the rumor, was the one who called the cops on Avery about the incident with the cat, and apparently Avery was just really covering for his friend. The person who mentioned this said, well, who didn't cover for their friend's stupidity when they were 20 years old? I mean, I sure as hell did. No, officer, those cigarettes are mine. This person isn't even old enough to smoke, whereas I was. And that's just what I'm actually going to admit here. But I'm guessing that Sandra, probably a cat lover, so when the cops needed a scapegoat for their plan to get the business from the Avery salvage yard, they probably approached Sandra to start the rumor, and she gladly did it because of her hatred towards Steven for letting his friend immolate the fuzzy little feline companion. I'm sure that Sandra had talked about it at the office nonstop, especially if she's the one who called, because that landed Steven in hot water. So when they decided to put the screws to Steven on the plot to grab his family's auto salvage business, they knew exactly where to start. As I'll illustrate later, everything has to start somewhere. Wait, what grabbed for the Avery's auto salvage business? I'll get to that shortly. I addressed this in a prior video, but what was Avery supposed to do? Go to the cops and say somebody's spreading rumors? As far as I know, there are no defamation laws, but either way, that's a civil matter, which would take time and money and lawyers that the Averys certainly didn't have. Nothing about that is criminal. Well, not back then anyway. I mean, now you've got cyberbullying and that, but back then you took care of business the old-fashioned way. Not to mention that the person making the accusation's a family member and a relative of a cop. What are you going to do? Go to the cops? Cops look out for their own, even the bad ones, unfortunately. Luckily, they're few and, well, I shouldn't say that. Hopefully they're few and far between, but not always, as this town will soon prove. So Steven does the one thing that most people would think to do, not to mention a hick from a small town who's young and male. He threatens her, drives her off the road, and holds an unloaded gun to her and relents when he sees the daughter in the back. Obviously, all he wanted to do was frighten her, otherwise the gun would have been loaded and he wouldn't have stopped at the sight of the daughter. Nonetheless, he's now on the poopy list of the cops since Sandra's husband is a deputy. And guess what other gem they now have? He now has a reputation. A now legal reputation of violence towards women, written in stone forever in Wisconsin's court system, a rap that will conveniently be used against him in the Penny Bernstein assault a mere 6 months later. Now the question I pose is this: was that a coincidence? Why would his own relatives start a rumor about him? Just to be mean? Sure, people are mean, but generally that childish behavior ends when your teenage years end. Why would she do that? To get back at him because of a cat? I mean, PETA was founded only 5 years before, in 1980, so it's not like there was a cruelty to animals crowd in small-town Manitowoc like there might be today. Not to mention that these were country folk back in the 80s. As I stated in prior videos, country folk view animals a little bit differently from city folk. So would that be motivation to get him in such trouble? Was there an ulterior motive involved? I know, man, you're really grasping at straws here. Well, I've said it before. Once reveals existence, twice reveals coincidence, 3 times reveals a pattern. Could this all have been some drastic coincidence that the rumor was started, Avery took action, it landed in hot water, and ended up forming a pattern? Notice the use of the word pattern, 3 times pattern, even though it happened only once. But it doesn't matter to the court. To the court and the cops, it's a pattern of violence towards women of a sexual nature that wound up with him being in jail wrongly for 18 years because of that characterization? Sure. But with everything that's been uncovered, I started to doubt these coincidences. You start a rumor via a family member who happens to be a member of law enforcement, or at least their community, who's angry at the target. You start the rumor knowing that the person is going to react, and then you know the legally recorded behavioral profile to use 6 months later when you put the final nail in the coffin to put an innocent man away for 3 decades for something he didn't do in order to snag the business away from his family and onto somebody else's bank account. Uncovering that in an investigation is kind of hard to dismiss to a jury as to why an innocent man was put behind bars as his children grew up without him. When I'm trying to solve a problem, I always put myself in the other guy's shoes. What were they thinking? What really happened? What logically happened? What could have happened? Is there an end goal? Be it a project, a building, a book, whatever. It has to start somewhere, and subsequently it has to end too. You see a building standing there, and most people somehow deep down just simply think, well, there was always a building there. Well, guess what? It was once grassland. What happened to make that building get there? You've got a bottle of soda in front of you. How did that soda bottle get there? Somebody had to decide what goes in it, where to get the supplies, where to make it, what the logo looks like, how to brand it, who would sell it, how to get it to whatever retail store, what to sell it for, amongst endless other points of commerce that went into it. And it's a simple freaking bottle of soda. Yet there it sits right in front of you, waiting for you to enjoy. Read the essay I Am a Pencil if you want more clarification on it, but I'm striving at a point here. Why would somebody want to start a rumor about some random low-life relative? For kicks? Sure. But what if there was an end game? Any building starts out with somebody wanting to do or sell something at that very location. Somebody wants to take that bare land and do something with it or on it. So they build a building. But you have to figure out what its purpose is, how big it's going to be to suit that purpose. You have to acquire the land, then get an architect, then get the contractors to build it, then grease the palms of the politician to get the permits, then you have to have it maintained. So many things go into the formation of that building, yet so many people out there look at it and say, it's a building. Every town has a main street where commerce happens. You got zones for industrial versus commercial versus residential versus parkland. Somebody makes those decisions. They all start somewhere. Well, what if there was an end game that had somebody wanting something, but there was an obstacle in their way? You see it all the time in real life and on TV shows. People with power make decisions to get what they want. There's a business in northern Illinois that shall, not to say should, remain nameless, that had its headquarters at its location for 83 years at the time of this story since its founding. The CEO decided to move the headquarters 45 minutes north. Why would he do such a thing? Why spend all that money and time to relocate that pillar of the community and force the workers to make adjustments in their daily lives? Turns out, so it was that he'd have a 45-minute shorter drive to his cabin in Wisconsin. To add insult to injury, he left the company a couple years later, but in the process made everyone who worked for the company drive an extra 45 minutes to work so that he could have a 45-minute shorter drive 6 times a year. Or the workers either moved closer to work, uprooting their family and their community, families that had probably been there for generations, having to send their kids to different schools and hopefully make new friends and not be bullied as the new kid, not to mention affecting the community that was probably built around that company like most older, smaller communities were. Or the workers just quit and found work elsewhere. It completely disrupted and altered the lives of many families for a 45-minute shorter drive. That was it. But that decision started somewhere. Sean Atwood posted a video that started to piece this puzzle together, at least for me, that made me start down the road to my opinion on what might have happened, or shall I say how it happened. Him I'll mention because he's in the UK and doesn't have to worry about being affected by the Manitowoc machine. According to Atwood, in 1985, the year that Avery was accused of the penny assault, Sheriff Herman, who wasn't a sheriff at the time but he was on the force, tried to do a land grab for the Avery property. Now, I have a small team working with me to gather more info on this, and one of the guys who does this land study stuff for a living is trying to piece together if there's anything having to do with the Avery land itself for a vast number of reasons. The Avery land is a donut hole in a land donut surrounded by the company that's now owned by the Maples as Badgerland Aggregates, one of the ones involved in the scandal that I mentioned. There could be a chance that somebody wanted to get a hold of that land. There's also a link on how Deborah Sukawati, or Sakati, I don't know, I'm just going to say Sukawati. Deborah Sukawati was murdered and left in that gravel pit in 1977. That land at the time was owned by the Ranstads, which happens to be one of the names on the list of people allowed onto the Avery property when the investigation was going on. Deborah Sukawati happens to be related to Carmen Boatwell, the addict who died on November 3rd, 2005, who in turn happens to possibly be related to Teresa Halbach. I'm waiting for confirmation on that, and I don't need that relation to exist for the Teresa still possibly being alive theory, although it certainly would bridge a gap, and I'll get into that shortly, but I did want to mention it here since it kind of tied together. As for the land, nothing's popped up yet, but I think that the land acquisition would have simply been icing on the cake. That's my opinion anyway, so until there's further evidence to alter my thought, I'm just going to leave it at that. I say that due to the fact that the Avery property to this day is still in the Avery name, and nothing more, at least to my knowledge, has been done to try to annex it. I'm guessing that it's not a major player in the decision-making process around what went down, but like the Martinez thing or Martinez thing, I don't know if it's got anything to do with it, but I am mentioning it just in case. It's an if, so just in case something does come to fruition in the future. However, I think that Atwood is onto a major portion of why this all went down. I don't think he's made the connection, and in fact, I don't think anyone's made this connection to the rumor being the catalyst to all this as a way to get the Avery business, but this is where and why it all started. Remember, when Teresa's car is found, the Averys were coincidentally up north. Steven was interviewed by the local sheriff that weekend. Steven Avery admitted in an interview to the Marion County Sheriff, who had, hopefully had no ties to this nefarious situation in the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, but it was either on the November 5th or the November 6th interview. He said this. He said, when he went away for those 18 years for that wrongful conviction on the Penny case, all the business that the Averys used to get stopped. Well, who did that business go to? Well, it went to Cleveland Auto Salvage, the salvage yard coincidentally owned by Sheriff Robert Herman's family. Atwood said that this company does $1.5 to $1.75 million in revenue a year. Not bad for a small town. Now add that to a sheriff's pay, pension, insurance, bennies, etc., and they're living a pretty nice life. Do that for 30 years, and you're talking around $50 million minimum. That's no small potatoes. Hell, that alone could have paid the Avery lawsuit with a single check and still had enough left over to throw one hell of a party. Am I stretching here? Again, remember the company in Illinois? The CEO moved the company headquarters for a 45-minute shorter drive. Every decision starts somewhere, and it's usually powerful people making decisions to benefit themselves. How many people lost their job in the last few years and had to detach the machine that they worked on for 20 years from the floor of the plant so they could send it overseas for cheaper laborers to now work on? I'll quote the movie Office Space. All this downsizing is happening so Bill Lumberg's stock can go up 1/4 of a point. I'm not bashing corporations here, but most people can understand those examples. So why would it be a stretch to think that putting away a local lowlife who comes from a poor family of outcasts that the elites already despise in order for them to cash in on kickbacks of $50 million? Now all of a sudden, because it's cops, human nature goes out the window? We all know the stereotype of the cop. The cop's the guy who got made fun of in high school, probably had rumors circulating around him or her, and put himself in a position of authority to never have to deal with that again, and to be the one divvying out the authority. That Cartman cliche exists for a reason. Hell, there's a movie out right now where The Rock plays the guy who was humiliated in high school, and now he's the big buff CIA agent. Art mimics life. Starting to believe me now? So how would you go about doing this? I always put myself in the other guy's shoes. What would I do? How would I do this? How would I accomplish this? What would I do if somebody started a rumor? What would I do if somebody murdered my daughter and got away with it? That was on an episode of Undercover Boss. The guy at the job being featured severely beat this guy who murdered his daughter. He knew it, but the cops had no evidence to charge the guy. And the dad says, well, thank God the guy didn't die. But would you say that? Would you want him killed? Would you kill him? I mean, most parents wouldn't hesitate to end the life of somebody who's intent on harming their child, but what would you do? More than likely, you'd have a plan to do your own brand of justice. But what would you do if you wanted to grab that land? Theorize robbing a bank or embezzling money from somewhere. You have to start somewhere. Most people would have a plan. Problem is, most people either miss a key piece, don't think far enough ahead, or the main kicker, they don't have the position, opportunity, or authority to fully cover their tracks. They're not high up enough in the company. They don't have enough money to buy the equipment to pull off the heist. If they did, they wouldn't get caught. Some do. T.B. Cooper, the Zodiac Killer. I mean, some could think far enough ahead and pull it off, or just get lucky, but how many times have you been that lucky on anything like that? How many times did you throw a party in your youth and hide all the evidence, yet you missed that one piece and your parents still found out? P.S. You young people out there, don't throw the bags of beer cans in the recycling bin. The old man will somehow make it there before trash day. Use your neighbor's bins. Oh, and remember where you put that bottle of Crown Royal, because not only will you get caught, the old man will confiscate it and drink it right in front of you. Now, what if you were a person or part of a group who were the ones that were trained to spot and catch crooks, knew every loophole and opportunity, knew human nature and how people react to things, knew how to surveil people and learn their behaviors, and had the authority to be able to do whatever they wanted because there was no oversight, because they were the oversight. So if Atwood is right and the mob, as he calls it, to which I agree, is the sheriff's department, what would they do? I'll add here that in Manitowoc there's an old abandoned building that Al Capone used to stay in when he went up there, and that's where he ran his operations out of. He had places in Kenosha, Wisconsin, Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and according to Wisconsin's own current Attorney General Brad Schimmel, Milwaukee, Wisconsin is currently the #1 hub for human trafficking in the United States. He ran on vowing to destroy it. Supposedly, there are more human slaves in the United States now than in 1865. It's not that far of a stretch to think that the Roaring Twenties simply continued into modern times on the eastern coast of Wisconsin. And no, I'm not saying that the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office is involved in human trafficking, although somehow that wouldn't surprise me. I'm simply saying that organized crime still exists and exists in this location. The problem with Prohibition and why it was so hard to bring down the bad guys is because everyone was either in fear from the repercussions or everyone was on the take. Every cop, every judge, even jury members. Remember the movie The Untouchables? Capone rigged the jury. They had to swap juries in order to convict him, and the only thing that they could get him on was tax evasion, a federal offense, because everyone local was on the take, because they were the oversight. So nothing could be done until a higher overseer brought them down. So don't think that these types of things can't happen, because modern history shows us that they already did and happened in the exact location in question. With that said, if I were a guy with resources and a goal of getting $50 million and all I had to do was have a low-life patsy sit in jail for the rest of his life, would I? If the answer is yes, how would I do that? If you want to shame someone, you can simply start a rumor. One that's started by a family member and a cop against a low-life outcast weighs in pretty hefty. If that doesn't do the trick, you really have to do a number like, put the guy away. If Herman wanted to get the business of the Averys and have it over to his auto salvage, couldn't he simply ask the sheriff to start using his family salvage yard instead of the Averys? After all, Robert Herman's brother Todd, who later quit the auto salvage and auto body business to become a deputy himself, used to have the contract to do all the detailing that the sheriff's cars needed right off the line. The squads needed decals and lights, etc., and Todd got that contract. How swell. Just goes to show that even though Sheriff Herman wasn't of any rank in the department at the time, he obviously had some pull even back then. Not to mention the fact that he's the current sheriff, but as for the car detailing, they now farm that out to somebody else. Why? Did it look too suspicious that the Hermans got that contract and the salvage yard stuff? The Maples were indicted for a non-bid/low bid scandal. Imagine if the sheriff's department was accused of such a thing. Granted, Todd went into police work later on, so he had to quit that gig, but did he switch because of the power and the killer bennies of the sheriff, or was it to make sure that there was no conflict of interest on the small stuff so that the big paycheck could continue to flow? Pick your battles, right? I sure do that, and citizens are very attuned to that sort of stuff. Well, when they bother to look, and they get very mad when they find out about it. So, eliminate the possibility. So how would the sheriff, who was a simple deputy at the time, manage to get that business from all the DUIs, tows, crashes, repairs, investigations, repos, drug busts, etc., from the Averys who've had it forever without drawing attention or being hit with a conflict of interest and possibly jail time? The only way to do that is to eliminate the competition. That's where the land grab came in, but even if that wasn't a go, the citizens would certainly believe that the cops wouldn't want to associate with a family auto salvage business whose son was convicted of sexually assaulting an upstanding member of the community. I mean, that would look so bad that the citizens would completely understand why the business would be handed over to Sheriff Herman's family, even if there was a technical conflict of interest. Humans are so benevolent. Well, sure, there's a conflict of interest, but it's not nearly as bad as giving money to a family whose son committed a terrible crime. I mean, the actual owners didn't do anything, but that doesn't matter. I mean, only the perception matters. But police are trained to understand human nature, so they know what they can get away with. I've noticed that people will let certain things slide if the alternative is worse. So how do you get the public to turn on the Averys since they've been around forever? They live on Avery Road. I stated it that I wouldn't be surprised if that 40 acres wasn't from the 40 acres and a mule from the Homestead Act way back in the day. They've been in the community a long time. Outcasts? Sure, but good people, right? Well, take Steven's uncles, for example, arrested for certain domestic-related calls on their spouses, etc., so it wouldn't be a stretch to think that Steven was capable of that, right? I mean, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. All you need is things like that to start to form a pattern. Cops know human nature. Add the cat, and that starts the fire, no pun intended, of being able to make Steven the scapegoat. If you start a rumor like that and it grabs enough sentiment from the public that it destroys the Avery's credibility, great. Switch the business over to Cleveland Auto Salvage, and no one is the wiser. Hell, the community will support it. Well, it's still not that bad. I mean, the whole bare ass and flashing thing. I mean, remember, the community thought that Avery was still innocent until Brendan's confession. Remember the bar interviews? It takes a bit for people to really turn on somebody, especially if they've done nothing really bad. It had been 6 months since Avery's road incident, and I'm guessing the business wasn't swapping over as fast as they'd like, so they had to initiate Plan B, or that was part of the plan, they just had to time their moment. Either way, cops know human behavior. Knowing that Steven couldn't go to the cops or afford an attorney, they pretty much knew that he was going to react and retaliate against Sandra. Hell, I consider doing it. You'd consider doing it. You say you wouldn't, but realistically, when you have no resources or other options, what other option is there? You scare the hell out of someone and hope that they were so scared that they don't tell their cop friends. Battered women's shelters don't exist for no reason. Threats can go a long way. Unfortunately, cops don't respond like that. There was literally nothing Steven could have done except for let his cousin lie about him and continue to falsely trash him in his family's name. Again, people will comment on perfect world scenarios that don't work in the real world. Like it or not, he had no other choice other than to hope it went away. Well, what 22-year-old male is going to let that slide, especially a country boy back in the 80s? That rep will haunt you for the rest of your life, like Dog Dude. The cops knew that. Now, with that action of him running his cousin off the road, they've got violence against women and sexual deviancy helping to form a pattern which will come into play miraculously within 6 months. What pattern? I mean coincidental timing. All the necessary background info to get the citizens thinking that Steven is a bad dude. People can only know what they're told. Remember Dog Dude? So if this was all put into place, it has to start somewhere. Again, every building starts out as a plot of grass. How would you make this happen? You have your mark. Now you need your victim. You have months to plan this. Cops know that within a few months, people forget things and don't connect the dots anymore. Hell, politicians essentially depend on this human behavior of forgetfulness. Marion Barry, smoked crack, got his job back. Remember Rob Ford? Anyway, when it comes to a victim, you need somebody who the people will sympathize with, who will appear helpless, someone who the people know and they like, an upstanding member of the community. But there's a problem. You would have to know his or her patterns. Well, preferably female, because males are harder to claim victim status and innocence. You'd have to know her weaknesses. You'd have to put something in place for something to happen to her via an assailant. And you'd have to get the citizens and a jury to believe that it was Steven Avery that did it. That's a lot to put together. How the hell could you possibly know all that and make it happen? Well, actually, it's not that difficult. Police stings are exactly what I'm describing. Put the hooker on a corner and your suspected John will come a-asking for directions. The only difference is how long the plan takes and how long the execution of it goes. Cops know human patterns. Their job is to notice things in the community. If they see a shop that closes at 7 p.m. and it still has its lights on and activity at 11 p.m., they go check it out. I was working at a retail store as a teenager and somebody hit the danger button on accident. The cops came in quietly and they searched everywhere because if a criminal was hiding and said, "You tell the cops I'm here and I'll kill you," they had to eliminate that possibility. The cops knew Penny because she was an upstanding member of the community. Everybody knew that Penny was a health nut. Everyone knew she went jogging on the same stretch of beach around the same time every day, or at least every so often, a section of beach that was secluded with very few witnesses to be had. They also knew that Gregory Allen had assaulted a woman on that very same spot on that beach. Allen looked enough like Avery, just like Carmen Boatwell looked enough like Teresa Halbach, but that'll be discussed later. So it wouldn't be a stretch to frame Avery for this crime as long as the two key ingredients were in the same place at the same time and human nature would take its course. It didn't matter if you had an alibi. If you have a rock-solid identification, which most of us now know is the most unreliable of evidence when it comes to courtroom procedures, a witness identification with a sketch of Avery that Jean Couché drew and the victim picking him out of a lineup, you can sway the jury to believe whatever it is that you say. Like Chris Rock, when the cop was so hostile towards him, he said, "He made me think I stole my own damn car. Oh, Lordy Lord, I done stole a car." We all have that frugal friend. How do you get him not to come to a party? Make sure you hold it at an expensive place or one with a cover charge, or one where you got to pay to park. Remember the movie Backdraft where Robert De Niro's character keeps Donald Sutherland's character from making parole by asking him, "What would you do to the whole world, Ronald?" And he says, "Burn it all." Cops know how to manipulate things. Watch Brendan Dassey's testimony again if you need a refresher. If you know enough about what drives someone, you can predict their movements. So when they need to pin something on Avery, they put two people together where no one else would be and where they knew the outcome of the encounter. And the thing that tipped it off for me was in Making a Murderer, Avery's own lawyer, which subsequently leads me to believe that he'd not yet made these connections, which solidified the goal of the cops pulling this Teresa incident off successfully. He mentions, as fate would have it, Gregory Allen was under surveillance at that time, but the exact afternoon that no one was on his tail is when this assault on Penny occurred. How coincidental. Again, how many coincidences do you need before something turns into a pattern? For me, this is just adding to it. I believe, if memory serves, that there are sleuths out there who pinned that decision or fault on Jean Cachet at the time, and that was supposedly why Cachet didn't believe that Avery's DNA test was conclusive. The only one to say so, might I add. He had to do whatever it took to keep them off his trail. He also said something that should have been a red flag for all of this. Cachet said, "Has DNA been fabricated before?" "Yes." "Okay, Gene, how would you know that? And why would you say that?" First off, you would have to have a situation where the DNA fabrication was used against you and you caught it. The only other option would be that you fabricated the DNA evidence yourself against someone else and it worked. But if that were the case, are you that conceited that you'd actually admit to that in a deposition? So which is it, Gene? Either way, be it coincidence or on purpose, Cachet was the one who supposedly made the call that let Allen out of sight of the surveiller, which essentially allowed Penny to be assaulted. Like before, when I said, if you find out who called that shot that didn't let Jody out that fateful day, you find them and you find your killer. Well, if you find out who was responsible for letting Allen out of the police's sight, you find the person who can tell you everything. Assuming that's the case, that Cachet was the one that called that shot, if the deposition lawyers would have stumbled onto that little tidbit of evidence, that would have turned this whole case from an unfortunate incident to the most vile setup of an innocent man and woman for profit in modern history. Let that sink in for a second. For those of you who can't comprehend why the cops would have hated Avery so much, it wasn't him. It was what he represented. Avery being let out with a lawsuit investigation in the works would have had the potential to expose the framing of an innocent man to grab $50 million worth of auto salvage business from the Avery's family to the law enforcement family. Holy shit. Still think the Halbach disappearance was a remarkably timed coincidence? Back to the plot point, Cachet was also the one who drew that sketch of Avery that was supposedly used to identify Avery, even though the sketch was based off a mugshot and not based off of Penny's description. Do you think that was impromptu? Cachet just decided to do that to save time or to benevolently save poor Penny Winnie from reliving that assault? Remember, I said that 3 indicates pattern. Even if Cachet was the possible fall guy, what if Cachet really didn't want the info on this deposition to get out because he was the one responsible somehow for making Gregory Allen available to do his assault? I mean, with all of these possibilities, it might not even be a far stretch to say that they pointed Gregory Allen to his mark. Who knows? Maybe they even said, "Hey man, you get a free shot on this cute little fit uptown girl here, and all you need to do is not tell anyone." Granted, if that were the case, since Allen's currently in jail, he probably would have blabbed about that in order to get his sentence annulled, but I'm leaving no stone unturned. Then again, knowing what they did to Avery and possibly Deborah Sukawati, threats from people with power can go a long way. And there ain't no battered convict shelter, if you know what I mean. Well, there is. It's called the morgue. That would also explain a witness description that there was actually a police presence at the beach that day. Perhaps to make sure that this went off without a hitch. Now that, I'll admit, might be far-fetched, but with this group of clowns, I'm not putting anything past them. Either way, Cachet might have been eyed up by Avery's lawyer for letting Allen out of the surveillance officer's sight for whatever reason, innocent or not. Not to mention added things like the sketch and the comments about the DNA fabrication. He could very well have been the one who dropped the ball. It was a horrible accident. Or was it? Was it he who told the pursuing detective to go to another Simon and oops, look what happened? Or was all of this planned? Planned knowing the outcome of the perp and the victim's interaction in a secluded area, then also knowing that Steven Avery, with his recent, mind you, sexually deviant behavior and violent assault of a police officer's wife and one of his own family members, you would now, and only now, fit the physical and behavioral description of somebody with the background that might do such a horrible thing to poor innocent Penny Bernstein. How uncanny is fate that just like Teresa disappearing right before the key depositions, that the exact afternoon that Penny was able to be assaulted, Alan wasn't trailed, and Penny happened to be jogging along that secluded beach area where no one was. Alan went to that same secluded spot where he assaulted a woman before and did the same thing to Penny, who was known to jog every day in that exact location. No one's brought this up, at least to my knowledge, and in fact, I just recently thought of it. But what if this whole thing really revolved around not a major screw-up, but a major plan that was about to be uncovered by the deposition lawyers? Uncovered by a couple of lawyers who were forced to bring this lawsuit because the lenient Wisconsin Attorney General, Peg Lautenschlager, who also happens to be a former DA for Winnebago County, which is a neighboring county to Manitowoc County, and whose husband just happens to be a cop, Peg Lautenschlager's office apparently saw no wrongdoing in the handling of the case that led Steven Avery to lose 18 years of his life, a case that Avery was all but guaranteed to win. Ignorance will generally bring you some punishment, but not retribution, especially if you're cops. Sorry, Your Honor, we just really screwed up. Planned malevolence, however, would, and that punishment takes the form of cops and judges in federal ass-bang prison. What if during these depositions it would have been discovered that Couchet or whoever called off the surveillance at the key moment, and the reason for doing so was so flimsy that the lawyers would have had the light bulb click? If that happened, they could have mounted a defense that stated that this was intentional. Why? Because all the cards that fell lead to Herman getting $1.5 million a year from the business that had prior been done via the Averys, and the cops knew it, and someone would have caved. Then the lawyers would have simply done the old follow the money routine and uncovered some serious wrongdoings. You put an innocent man in jail for profit, and no judge or jury is going to go easy on you. That, and with the civil case finding you guilty, you now open yourself to criminal cases regardless of what Attorney General Peg Lautenschlager's team said about you in their investigation. You now have the feds involved, and you now have the powers that be making decisions on your life, with you no longer having the power and the ability to control your fate like you would if everything was done at the local level, which you control. Remember when I said that they were the oversight? Well, when someone else above you is now the oversight, your power becomes meaningless. That's huge. Remember, you know what a cop fears most? It's not being shot, it's prison, being locked up with all those guys you put away. And just like Capone, with the local control that you control now taken away, you're screwed. Now add every pension in the county on the hook and your family being out in the streets, and you've got some serious motive. The most serious motive, I'd argue, in the history of local politics. And if you have that many people in this secret cabal involved, everyone is going down like Tracy Lords in the 80s. As long as the cops keep this contained and on their turf, they can still get away with it. So they had to come up with something that framed Avery, again, and kept them in control. What to do? I don't think people fully understand the scope of what possibly went down here. Could it be that Teresa was murdered at that exact day by some random dude, and the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office simply counted their blessings and used this to save their asses? Sure, but if you really start at the beginning and ask yourself why Avery was hated so much and why all these events happened, it realistically points all the way back to that rumor. Could it have been a rumor just to be a jerk to some lowlife? Sure, but with everything that can be traced and looking at examples like Pablo Escobar, Stalin, Pol Pot, the Northern Illinois CEO, or that one guy who murdered his neighbor because he made a pass at her and was afraid that his wife would find out, and numerous other examples of what humans are capable of, it's not too far of a stretch to consider that all this was started because of money, and it simply compounded on itself like lies do, and if it weren't for one hair with viable DNA and two curious film students, none of this would have ever come to light. Now that part is luck. Rethink the possibilities and ask yourself what is possible versus what is probable. Occam's razor doesn't always cut the mustard. The simplest answer isn't always the right one, and this possibility should have every law-abiding citizen shaking in their boots. I mean, regardless of how you think it started, whether it was a cave in Afghanistan or some governmental conspiratorial briefing room, a group of guys managed to hijack 4 planes, hit 3 targets, and one of them live on every news network in America on some random Tuesday morning. Thing about that is, it probably wasn't random. The date, anyway. The Battle of Vienna in 1683 was the last major stronghold to beat before the invading of Rome and the Vatican by the Ottoman Turk army, which would have toppled Christianity and solidified the Muslim religion as the dominant world religion in the Middle East, Northern Africa, and subsequently then Europe, marked the defeat, turning point, and the eventual retreat of that army. That battle took place on September 11th, 1683. Less than 100 years before the founding of America, yet that attack on America happened on the same date. Coincidence or planned by the attackers? You tell me. The planned events of that day all started somewhere. Many red flags were missed, and if it weren't for such a horrific ending, nobody would have even bothered to look into it and piece the puzzle together. Hell, to this day there are even still arguments about what really happened, but point is, it had to start somewhere. All those fine details had to be planned, including the date, the time, the target who would be involved, funding, learning how to fly, etc. Yet there are those people out there who refuse to even consider that if such a feat were to take place, that every detail wasn't somehow possibly at least accounted for. All people see is the building and the patrons going in and out of the main entrance. The building was always just there. Even then, to run the building, to keep it going, there are forces at work making that happen. Those garbage cans don't miraculously empty themselves, yet there are people. Another example of this, using the legal system, kind of like the one I mentioned before where the judge framed the woman for refusing sexual advances, there were 2 judges in Pennsylvania, Judge Ciaravella and Judge Conahan, I think that's how you pronounce it, who had their whole family involved in this scheme to supply juvie prisons with juvenile inmates for profit. These things happen. It all had to start somewhere. Someone had to have the guts to ask or hint, even jokingly after a few drinks, hey, we can make tons of money sending these kids away to our prisons. And the other guy says, that's not a bad idea. Innocent people will be hurt, but so what? They're probably going to be career criminals anyway, so who cares? I'm getting mines. Think of swingers clubs and cosplay conventions and those people who dress up as furry creatures. Think of 2 girls, 1 cup. That conversation started somewhere. Yet the stuff I'm about to mention and have mentioned will have numerous people saying, that's not possible, that can never happen. Well, believe what you want. I'm merely leaving no stone unturned, but I'm willing to bet that if people like Zellner start digging, that they will find a tangled web so interwoven into the fabric of those who control the community that this could possibly be one of the biggest stories in modern history. Remember Watergate? That couldn't happen. A president wouldn't do that. Some people are old enough to remember watching the most powerful man on planet Earth raise peace signs and fly off in a helicopter. Believe what you want. Humans are still animals. All I'm saying is that you should question everything and at least consider every possibility. After all, before making a murder, most of us were probably of the opinion that this poor lowlife killed some innocent girl. Some still do. Oh yeah, right, everyone out there, I knew all along that Avery was innocent. Yeah, okay. Well, if that's the case, open your eyes to the possibility that there may be more at play here than what is seen on the surface. This is where I'm going to end and move on to section number 2. basically, this is just blah, blah, blah. You don't have to listen to this. I'm adding this because the free crappy software that I use to make this audio into a video so that I can actually put it up on the internet, for some reason always cuts off the last few seconds, so it's probably going to get cut off here sometime. So I'm just going to kind of babble for probably 20 more seconds, so feel free to turn this off. But I do thank you for listening, and thank you for all the people that are giving the information. But again, question everything, so enjoy part number 10B, and I'll see you there.